Recording. Okay, let's see here. Zoom in a little bit. A little bit. Like that. Okay, so we're starting this thing out. Actually, we're not starting it, we're finishing it, right? Methods, kids. So the first thing we want to notice here is that this representation here is white light, right? And so this is projected light, or it's light from the sun, and it contains all of the colors in it. So it's actually the opposite of artistic light or pigment-based light. And so that's where this whole art Roy G. Biv thing comes from: the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So we're creating this illustration basically as an accompaniment to another project that we're going to be working on a little bit later. So what we want to do is get these little rays here to come through, right? And so what I've done is I've grabbed just a little ruler here, and I'm just going to essentially connect lines here to, I don't know, it kind of like goes all the way down. We want to give ourselves a little bit more room for that though, huh? Okay. What we should do is figure out what the middle of that is, you know. And it looks like it's an inch and an eighth. So if inch and a quarter rather. If I come in a quarter off each side, I get a half of an inch, so that would be my metal there. Whatever your metal is. So this would be like 5 inches, so that'd be 1, 2.5 inches here. Again, that's just gonna help me like define where the colors are gonna go, and then I can go ahead and get them to spread out and blend a little bit. Okay, so we have 1, 2 there, and so that'll be the division between essentially in light are red, orange, yellow to green, and then we would split at that point into the cyan, indigo, the blue, indigo, and the violet. And so it looks like we need to get 3 different separations inside of those. So luckily I've got an inch, I've got 2.5 inches in here, and so if I go in at 5/8 of an inch on each one, it's about right. No, that doesn't look about right. We'll go about here, we'll go about here. Looks better. We'll just kind of make a measurement that looks like about this. You just want it to look like it's fairly equally spreading out away from this thing. Like that. Same on the other side. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to eyeball it at thirds, something like that. I'm going to go in here like this. I'll get up in here like this. Okay. So what this represents is the visible color spectrum. And not everybody can see all of it, but you know, most of us can see like almost all of these or most of these colors, right? And so they have different frequencies. Certainly you've heard about infrared and ultraviolet light. Infrared would be like beyond this red spectrum, and ultraviolet would be beyond the violet spectrum. So those are going to be things that we can't see, but we can measure them, you know, scientifically. So what I'm going to do is just assign color within those for now. And so, taking my paint that I brought along with me, you could use watercolor, you could use your temperas, so whatever you ended up taking that day is fine. What I do with these is I just pierce a little hole in them, and then I just kind of squeeze it through that hole, and it keeps it moist for a good long time for me. That ought to do. Get a little bit of yellow involved as well. Okay. And then some magenta. Good morning, dear. Okay. Set those aside for now. Looks like we're starting with our red or magenta first, huh? But this is going to be really light magenta, so what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to let this dry and either add a second coat or put some like red watercolor over it, just to get it like deeper, because this really is more magenta than anything. So anytime you're using acrylic, you want to clean out your brush and you want to dry your brush out really well, and then that keeps your colors from being problematic in terms of mixing together or whatever. We're going to skip one and we're going to go down to yellow here, because red, orange, yellow would be the pattern that we're working with in the visible color spectrum. And I'm just being really careful to keep it on my line as best I can. With acrylic, you can't really like erase anything, so be careful when you're painting and try to get your, as you're pulling, try to pull along the line that you've created. So now what I can do is I can go in here and I can mix up an orange. Like I can add a little bit of yellow to this, a little bit of magenta. I'm already seeing the magentas like overpowering, kind of. I'd like it a little bit more yellow, but we'll see. I'm going to spread it out first. Maybe a touch more magenta from here. The whole idea is to work with experimentation on like analogous colors. Analogous colors are next to each other on the color wheel. So this yellow, orange, red color scheme would look good together in a painting because they have a little bit of each other in them. So we would refer to this as harmonious color here. Normally I have my students, normally I have them do a color blending exercise after they've done this, or after they've done the color wheel rather. Doing a little bit backwards with you all because I wanted to introduce scientific color as well, because I feel like it's good for core content connection. It's a good way to talk about science and art together. Both very interesting to students typically. Also kind of helps them understand how physical color works versus light-based color. A little more magenta. Yeah, there we go. Looking, that's a lot more rich. You could mix it up ahead of time, you know, and apply it too if you're worried about taking too much time blending. Get a little bit more right here. Okay. So now we're going to progress down to our blues and greens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump one for blue, right? Do a little green blue, do all the way G-biv. Oh, that's correct. So we're going to go with the blue here. Because really green should be between blue and yellow, which is why it filters out Roy G. Biv style. You can see I'm leaving a little bit of white next to it because I'm going to mix a little bit of just magenta in there to kind of get that indigo look. Indigo is essentially blue-violet. I don't know why it got called indigo, but it is. It's an interesting thing. It always confused me when I was a kid too. I was like, what is indigo even? They used to make special brands of pencils that were indigo pencils, and they were like draftsman pencils. From making blueprints and stuff, like it was indelible marking. It's kind of hard to find the right ratio sometimes for this like heavy blue violet. The key is to not get very much magenta in there at all. To not let that magenta really overpower the blue, but just to influence it just enough. Okay. I'm going to come back to that after it dries a little bit and go with some more magenta over the top. For now, I'm going to go ahead and mix up a good green. Now for this one, I know I'm going to need like a lot of yellow and a very, very slight amount of blue. Because yellow is very weak in terms of the primary colors, especially compared to blue. It takes a very small amount of blue to affect the color yellow. And so to get a good green, or a bright green, you have to use a lot of yellow and very, very small amounts of blue. So I'm just going to start by loading up 2 coats of yellow, so I have plenty on there to work with. And again, this is really helpful for just general practice when it comes to like applying this to a painting, because we will be doing a painting with this. Okay, very small amount of blue, and I'm just going to blend it out real clean, best I can. I'm liking that color. It's a nice green color. First try, and I literally just dabbed my my brush into that blue, like very little at all. So I got what I wanted. Be cool. There it would be. Okay, last thing here. We'll go back with a little more magenta on that blue, just to try to get a good saturated kind of like blue violet out of it. Get that indigo color to happen. Okay, so violet's pretty tricky as well. I use the same approach as I use with green. I use a lot of magenta and a very small amount of blue until I'm happy with the quality of the color. I'm having a little bit of my swatches blending here, so I'm just going to smooth them over to some degree just to make them look less foreign or less sloppy. Tempera, this might work a little better because your colors are going to dry pretty close to the way they look when you lay them on wet. Tempera is kind of a chalky medium. Sometimes it lightens up just a little, but with acrylic, sometimes it changes quite a bit. And you're just not quite sure what's going to happen with it. Tempera also gives you way longer to work. Like you can work tempera for quite a while. You can add water to tempera, just like watercolor, and you can like reactivate it and smooth it out. So if something happened, like you had a brush stroke somewhere you didn't like, you could wet your brush down a little bit and you go back in there and smooth it out. So tempera is a lot more forgiving. Those cakes that you guys have, they're a lot like these kind of cakes where you have to add water to them and then stir them up a little bit before you get a good pigment with it. So if you think it's like not generating much paint, then just add more water and stir it up and let it sit, and it'll break that pigment up. Still pretty bright. I'm going to go ahead and add more blue. I want to get that to a pretty dark violet. Again, violet's a difficult color to perceive sometimes for people. I find the cooler colors are more difficult to perceive sometimes. Like your violets and your greens. But I've heard of a lot of people having difficulty with oranges. So it's kind of in general secondary colors, I guess. It's a little darker. I'm losing some of my warmth here, some of that, a little more warmth back into that. A little more depth in there. If you were gonna try this out ahead of time, you know, and like mix up a bunch and then put it somewhere, and then like, you know, want to get the fidelity of that color to look good, you would want to paint it on like a separate piece of paper somewhere. That way you can really test it to see how it looks before you get it on the paper itself. Second coat of the magenta here. I'm going to go with a little more orange too, just because I feel like that can be a little more powerful. Second coat, looks like it's dry. Lighten it up a little bit with some yellow and